The book Framed. Why and where did this come from?
I was pulled into the dark side of social media marketing, specifically on Instagram. We violated Instagram's terms of service. My software would be logged in, pretending to be them, taking actions that garnered, hopefully, more engagements.
What is the dead internet theory? I haven't heard that.
If we have sufficient incentives to create fake content, wouldn't we see a proliferation in fake accounts with fake content, with fake upvotes, and all this other stuff? My stance on it is that eventually we will get to the point where bots probably do outnumber humans.
I'm really curious to know what is the things you're stumbling across when it comes to AI.
The window for the average person to go and create side projects, the prime window for that is today, in 2 years, but it will be a totally different environment.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of The Pursuit of Purpose. My name is Chris Kiefer, and today I am joined by Tim O'Hearn, who is an author of the book Framed, A Villain's Perspective of Social Media. And we're going to be talking about AI and technology and the internet and all sorts of fun things. So let's get into it. Tim, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Chris.
So you like the book Framed. Why and where did this come from? I will say I have a goal of writing a book myself. And so I always am like, I love chatting with authors that write on niche topics that they're passionate about, because that's something that I plan on doing soon.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak on it. I think anybody coming from like an engineering background, which I know is kind of your origin story as well, maybe you're always looking for ways to stay creative and stay productive outside of your day job. And for me, one of my big developments in my first year, my second year in the workforce, was that I was pulled into the dark side of social media marketing, specifically on Instagram. And it had everything anybody could want from a side business. It had some prestige and like social clout. It had, money, and it promised to be something that was like very, very relevant, that could potentially boost like my main career as well. So I was brought in by two guys who were actually in the nightlife industry here in New York City. And they said, hey, we are helping get people more followers on social media. We need a software person to kind of shore things up and take it to the next level. And that was the role I played. And between 2017 and 2022, I would say I became one of the experts in that space.
So you built a software to help create, or was it like false accounts that you're creating, or are these all, it's just like genuine strategy and running ads to get people to follow and like your profile?
It was still a black hat approach in that we violated Instagram's terms of service, but it was not the spammy, super spammy, like fake approach that maybe some people would think of by default. So what we did was we logged into the accounts of customers. And from there, that's where my software program would attempt to garner interest and reciprocal engagements from targeted accounts. So it would act as the user, as the customer, in a more controlled way to try to, get some things, get some actions in return.
And you're saying that it would act as the account that you connect this to is basically a bot that would have conversations or post comments on other people's profiles to try and get engagement and follows.
Yes, except during the day, it was the customer's actual account.
Ah, interesting. And then during the day, what do you mean but at night?
Yeah, so essentially, depending on when the activity was or when the bot was running, it would then have the version that was fully automated. So
Oh,
a customer would purchase our services, they would continue using their account as normal, but at the same time, or perhaps during the hours they weren't as active, my software would be logged in, pretending to be them, taking actions that garnered, hopefully more engagements.
and is that software still in existence?
It still exists, and some people have worked on their own versions. There's different types of like open source solutions for it as well. Ours was never open sourced, and I never sold the source code. I sold it as a software as a service type offering. So in the book, I called it Shark Social. That wasn't the actual name of the business, but it could be thought of as some of the most popular uh, applications of the time period were like Follow Liker and Jarvie. It was similar to those, except all of the control panel aspect was abstracted away from the customer. They just knew I enter my credit card details, I enter my targeting details, I enter my account details, and I get followers. So it abstracted the controlling of it. We handled all of that. And sure, out there, some people are still doing this, but the business is totally different today because Instagram and most other platforms have taken corrective actions.
Interesting. So now you are what are you doing these days?
A huge part of 2025 for me was getting this book out. So I wrote Framed, A Villain's Perspective on Social Media over a period really beginning in 2022. So it was this side hustle and this personal writing project that took an incredibly long time. But over that time, I was able to get some other work experiences that were relevant. I was able to find an editor who really helped me push things forward. And into 2025, I decided to more or less take a break from full time employment to go all in on the book. So that's what I've been doing over the last few months. I would say, generally speaking, it's quite likely that I do go back to industry, my preferred industry being quantitative finance, or work on something by myself.
And so, yeah, I'm really curious to know what is the things you're stumbling across when it comes to AI that you are. Well, and I guess before you answer that, I'll give you a little bit of my perspective on all this. So, when it comes to I feel like first of all, everything is changing so rapidly. Like for my business, this podcast is like my, fun slash slide hustle, but I don't even really have, there's no plan to like make this some sort of monetary um, thing. It's just like I want to connect with cool people, have good conversations, and then post them for other people to listen to. That's literally it. My money making business is Boolean, and we automate painting companies. So we're like doing all the one way I like to say it is if it's possible to run a painting business like residential and commercial painting with no overhead staff, I want to be a company that provides that service, meaning that I don't need an office manager, a finance person. You need like sales reps and painters, and that's it. And then all of the data is managed and operated by AI or databases and different softwares that you connect together. And can you get to no employees, no overhead employees? Probably. I mean, at some point. But in the meantime, it's like, can we do if you can do 4 million with three overhead staff? Can you do 8 million and not hire any more overhead staff? Like that's where we're at right now. So we're constantly looking at how can we automate or remove people in the back office from painting businesses. That's like what I think about all the time. And AI in the last, I mean, anyone that has been playing around with AI, it just you can feel and see an exponential curve of how it's changing, how it's affecting everything. And so I'm like, when I talk to people that are diving into it, I'm always like, talk to me about like, yeah, what are the things that are going to be very disruptive that you're seeing that people aren't thinking about?
Sure. I think your experience is really relevant here because automation, which could be thought of as maybe the little brother of AI or even the precursor to AI, is really important. And we've seen it create and then also kind of cannibalize some of the industries that have sprung up in Web 2.0 in the internet age. One of the good examples would be that you used to be able to make a living being your hometown web developer who just made the websites, created some simple graphics, charged a monthly fee for hosting, and you could build a little business that way. It's totally shifted now, even in the last couple of years, where there's this major push by Wix and Squarespace or whatever to drag and drop your own websites. And I can tell you that any of those websites look better than the ones I was making when I was calling myself a web designer back in, 2010, 2011, 2012. So that's one real example where we've seen like an industry be created by the internet and then also be cannibalized by the internet and by automation. When I think about artificial intelligence, I think about the agents that I was creating at Shark Social. So I named the original iteration of my program Mako, and Mako is a type of shark. It's actually one of the fastest swimming sharks, and I thought it was an apt name because the system was meant to be adaptable. So ideally, the system was intelligent in that it could respond to different stimuli in different ways. Meaning, if we found an account that was giving likes and follows back really quickly and really reliably, we would try to direct more of the workflow to that account. More of our customers would go directly to that account because that's a free reciprocal action. When we take AI and modern advancements between foundational models and then also like the agentic workflows, you just see these massive changes where entire swaths of even things I've done as a professional software engineer are now being, erased, or the market for junior engineers is being like really, really condensed. I see a lot of this in the marketing space, and I'm sure you see it with like lead generation, with CRM, with all these different facets that you could have been an expert and built a business really easily. Now a lot of things are changing. And I've even seen it when reconnecting with people after this book. Some people who I've reconnected with have been people I knew from college. So here we are almost 10 years later, and they're like, oh, whoa, you did this thing on Instagram. That's really cool. And oh, you did this. Oh, did you know there's an agent that like can do this on Instagram? Or like, did you know there's an agent that can do this on LinkedIn? And that's true. Some of the things that I feel I built to generate the most value for Shark Social are now more or less being reduced to agentic functions that are more explainable and for the most part transparent to people who have no technical background at all. So it's both a risk for people like me and you, and it's also a massive opportunity.
Right. Yeah. My thought is, uh, it's good. Things are going to continue to change rapidly. So I feel like, I don't know, 90% of the population is more or less ignoring or provide like putting in very little effort to try and engage AI. And so my opinion is, if you're just one of the 10%, let's say, and it's probably smaller than that, the percent of the population that's actually trying to stay up and learn and push yourself. And I was talking to our team recently about, I want everybody trying to build and code things that you have no business doing. Like do stuff that's like, I don't know what I'm doing, but just like have the vision and go execute and experiment. And there's this whole movement of vibe coding. Have you heard this? And it's like the idea that we're now in a place where it's faster to just rewrite, you know, hundreds of lines of code because there's a typo somewhere than to go try and find the typo, you know? And how this one podcast I was listening to was talking about how not too long ago you had, um, if you're writing an essay, right, and you missed a period, you just go find, do some grammar cleanup, use Grammarly or something, go find it. Nowadays, it's like, oh, rewrite essay, boom, and it just regenerates your whole essay because you spelled something wrong, and that's faster than trying to go hunt down the issue.
Yeah, I found vibe coding pretty interesting. On my newsletter, I decided, okay, I'm going to have to give this a shot. And I tried to like vibe code through things, and not necessarily things I had no business designing, but what are some of these like simple to like medium difficulty things, such as like authentication, such as like client server processes, boilerplate code for like a React app using Next.js or whatever. And I found it was an incredible boost to my productivity. Also, with some major pitfalls, with it being that everything is really based on inference. So sometimes its response to not being able to get past an error code is to take what I feel are extreme and ultimately very wasteful paths, which could mean like rewriting the whole function, or having these like hallucinations where it tells you that it's doing something and then it doesn't do it. So I'm finding it definitely requires some oversight, but it's changing things very, very rapidly. And with other, I would say, some of my most trusted friends, when we're having these discussions, we're pretty much, we're not necessarily saying this, this whatever the new thing is, the 2035 hypothesis or whatever, where AI is going to completely take over. But we're definitely on the same page that we feel the window for the average person to go and create side projects, like profitable things, like, and just stand them up. The prime window for that is today, and it's probably been the last 6 months with tools like Cursor. And we'll see this kind of cap in probably 18 months, in 2 years, where it'll be so accessible that we'll then have AI for designing, like for like blueprinting out these different business ideas and then implementing them as well. So I think before it gets overly saturated, as we've seen in so many different niches here, I think just the general approach to using AI for like new business creation, um, we're going to find that AI is also taking the ideas away too. So the next 2 years are going to be a really fun time, but it will be a totally different environment. I think when somebody goes through school, or if somebody's graduating college in 3 to 4 years, the environment that they kind of come out to.
Yeah, what that's fascinating. I'm like, what do you do about the because I would say eventually the I guess I operate under the belief that AI is going to take away all jobs that are um, that primarily revolve around thinking, right? Eventually, and so it's like the opportunity right now, in a weird way, is to find a way to automate away or replace yourself with AI or replace other people with AI, right? Because that's the opportunity right now is do more with less, find ways to streamline, cut out whatever unnecessary people you can, including if you can replace yourself and go solve the next tier problem, then that's the most logical thing to do. But that there is a window where, like, yeah, right now the people that know that, less than 10% or whatever that small percentage is of people that are actually engaging AI, those are the ones that are building the businesses that you're talking about. But as that becomes even more, like you said, right now, if you have an idea or you want to code something, you can't, AI is not at a place where you can just say, make me an app and a website and a sales funnel to solve this problem, right? You have to have the whole vision, and then you're using AI to selectively build and code out aspects of that app. But you still have to go find the clients and the customers and get in front of people and that whole thing as well, which presumably all of those things could be, continued to be improved or optimized by AI. But there's still like that, the necessary person that's like orchestrating all the little agents that are doing the aspects of the business. And I don't know, is that also done by AI at some point in the future?
Your point is valid in saying that so many things related to like logical reasoning and inference will be replaced by AI is absolutely true. And it's almost flipped beyond like what, eventually I thought it would be like, okay, it'll replace like doctors and lawyers, but like that's a pretty far way off. And I'm kind of seeing like the opposite, where it's like some of the very, very like fine grained tasks, or the things that I would think you or I would find simple, it actually can struggle a little bit. It can get caught up on the wrong thing, especially as software versions change. But I think for larger things, such as like, getting a diagnosis of a condition or something, I think we're much, much closer to stuff like that than we ever would have imagined at this point. And I think that there's a lot of alarm bells going off, and eventually there will be a point at which somebody's having this conversation at a very high level, like what restrictions should we have, because we're going to have like massive white collar unemployment. I think all of this together is pretty scary. But for me as a software engineer who's somewhat senior at this point, it doesn't it doesn't scare me because this is like naturally like the pace of progress, and this is merely the next layer of things. I feel in my specialties, I feel totally secure in having a job and being good at it, using AI as a tool rather than seeing it as a competitor. But yeah, I think overall there is a lot changing here. And what I kind of look at in my book, and one of the final chapters, is this concept of the dead internet theory, which really says like if we have sufficient incentives to create fake content, if there's some way to either benefit from it from like ad placement or from just like running propaganda campaigns that manipulate people, wouldn't we see a proliferation in fake accounts with fake content, with fake upvotes, and all this other stuff? And that relates to the dead internet theory. My stance on it is that eventually we will get to the point where bots probably do outnumber humans. But currently, the way the internet is set up is that there is a cost to running a bot. Like if you were to create or if you were to purchase fake accounts on Instagram, for example, it's not cheap. It doesn't cost like $1 for 1,000 accounts. Like each account has $1 value because it's actually relatively difficult to create them today. So as we see more and more barriers and the cost increase, I think we'll maintain something like parity or something like balance, at least on the largest social networks that we have.
What is the dead internet theory? I haven't heard that.
So the dead internet theory started over 5 years ago on some, I would say, like conspiracy laden message boards. So pre AI, it was the thought that what if everything we're seeing on the internet present day is just created, it's just a complete facade. So even though I'm human, Chris is human, you log in and you're clicking around and you see supposedly user generated content, supposed conversations with real people, and supposed like users. Like think about logging into an online video game. What if you couldn't see the other side of the screen and that everything was a carefully curated mirage of reality? So it's saying like, what if when I log into the internet, every single thing I'm seeing was not created by a human, but it was made to look that way? And during that time, people were saying, hey, there are some really interesting companies, and we think that they were either funded by or acquired by the NSA or the CIA. So the conspiracy turns into this massive psyop where people are starting to make accusations of, oh, well, the government isn't just spying on us, but they're also attempting to influence public opinion by use of, maybe more advanced propaganda campaigns. And we see this more and more in authoritarian countries. And we have also seen it also in the United States, where if you look at how Reddit was during the last election, there were marked differences of what the front page of Reddit looked like during this election cycle versus the previous one, and also versus the one prior to that. So I think with AI, it's actually made it relatively difficult to discern human generated content versus something that is authentic, and especially with text posts. So when you go from text posts to images, you'd say, okay, generally some images I can still tell are AI, sometimes I can't. And for videos, again, it's a bit more obvious. But you and I are, pretty experienced on the internet, where we probably have these other ways of determining realness. Like your first thing won't be to like analyze the grammar and everything. It'll be to click the account and look at the account history, because that can't be faked as easily, or it'll seem more formulaic. But that's kind of how the dead internet theory has grown, where it was like this conspiracy where it's like, what if? And then AI and, obviously this generated content came about to the extent that if the incentives are there, the dead internet theory could be true.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a that. What is the like exactly like what you just said of when you see something like, is this real? You go and look at the account, and that's
Yeah.
like a subconscious thing that I would say millennials do.
Right.
Whereas my mom is just, to me, it's like mind boggling how susceptible the 60-year-old plus people
Yeah.
that just things that are like so blatantly obvious, like, okay, this is just stop reading. This is silly. This isn't real. But they don't sense that, you know? What are the other things that you feel like are, I agree that, like, obviously, like, for example, Facebook Marketplace, something super easy. When you see something, I immediately go look, when was this account created?
Hmm.
And how many other posts have they done? How have they sold anything else? Do they have any ratings? Those are all the things that are like, it's just weird if there was an account created last week, that's selling whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. It's like, I've had my account on Facebook for, you know, 15 years or something at
Yeah.
this point. And that's you can't fake that.
Yeah. This is really important to understanding like the future of the internet. I've addressed it in two different ways. One is that in communities focused on rule breaking, which I've been a part of, there's been this discussion of a trust score. So, kind of this estimation of what are all the factors of an account that a platform such as Meta or Google or whatever looks to understand how trustworthy an account might be or its likelihood of breaking the rules. And even though this seems maybe far fetched, it's pretty obvious, even if you're using a proxy or you're using a private browser, how you'll notice that you're getting stuck in a lot more of these bot check loops. So whether that's like Cloudflare that makes you wait longer or you get more captchas, both of these things operate on the same basis of trust. But on social media platforms, like embedded in social media platforms, there's this spectrum of data. And that's what becomes really, really interesting for trust score. So in my book, I try to break down trust score. Much of it is things like you just said. So account age, like the clustering of posts, like, does this make sense? Does the name of the account seem like it makes sense with the picture? Does the picture make sense? How many pictures are there? I suggest about 20 different things that would influence trust score in either way. The point is that as an account exists for longer and you try to find what I call intimate relationships. So the suggestion that somebody actually knows this person, that's really useful. And then the ultimate is the blue check mark, which is an actual platform designation if someone has provided their ID and has done ID verification, which is now like quite widespread. So at least we can be sure that when the verification was completed, that there was a real person behind the account. Of course, then the account could have been sold. But you can imagine, like, to do this en masse, it's an expensive operation. And if you're going to have a verified account and then sell it, that's almost like selling your identity. You would never want to do that. I found your point about like kind of boomers or the older generations really, really interesting as well. One of the earlier chapters in Framed is called Algorithms and Truth. And in that chapter, I address this head on. And in it, I say, remember this idea of like the 20th century journalist in America, how they were so respected and newscasters were so respected. They were like not only public figures, but also these arbiters of like trust and decency and ethics and whatever. And the point I make is that when Facebook came out with this feature and they named it the news feed, it had this effect of convincing people that it had a similarity to the 20th century concept of news programs and newscasters. And that if it's at the top of the page, just like it would be a newspaper headline, oh, it must be important. Coming from the newspaper background, the broadcasting background, you would say, also, I expect that to be true. But what happened as things transitioned is that truth isn't really a factor. And I think it's outrageous to expect a platform like Meta to be kind of arbitrating disputes or like the factual basis of things. So that's been a huge issue. And I think it's that same thing where you or I, like, I'm sure we've been scammed and we've fallen into weird traps on the internet. Somebody's first day on the internet, I can't imagine what it's like today. But the truth is that every day now is somebody's first day on the internet. Across the world, there's this widespread access, and they're just learning how to differentiate real from fake. The problem is that as we have tons more fake content, like really, really well embedded sales pitches. These people have no memory of what it was like in early Web 2.0 when things were actually authentic.
Yeah, it's super. There are so many things there. Um, is so shadow bans. It's another thing that I see that you've talked a lot about. What is that, and is that like, yeah, is that real? I mean, I have my own way I would describe it, but I'm curious how you would define that.
The topic of shadow bans does go back to the news feed. Before we had an algorithmically curated feed, we had MySpace, which was just chronological. And so if you had 500 friends and all 500 of them decided to post when they got home from school, your bulletin board was a mess because all of their posts were there. So Facebook, when everybody moved there, we realized that as the friend count grew, there was a need for this curation. And on their end, curation is nice because it allows you to more, slyly put advertisements in the feed. But what this means for shadow banning and exposure in general is that they need to come up with algorithms that make sure people are getting the word out. They're getting exposure for what they say, but that also like the people viewing their feeds are like feel good about it. Like they're engaged. They're wanting to come back. They're entertained. And unfortunately, like what's happened in general is that my Facebook feed, like half of it now, isn't my friends at all. It's like random groups that are suggested, like content from random people. Because in general, if this is curated on like a national, international level, yeah, generally it's going to be more interesting than like a dog photo, right? It's like than a dog photo from somebody I grew up down the street from. It's totally different. So when you think about how these algorithms are curated, the point is that there's limited space to begin with. So when you or I would maybe, you have a big post, you announce a new job, a new business venture, or whatever. In the early 2010s, everything I posted like that went crazy. I got tons of feedback. It was really, really good. But then it stopped. And even when promoting my book on Facebook, I had almost no traction at all, almost no likes, almost nobody saw it. And this relates to the concept of shadow banning, where it started in web forums and then it kind of morphed onto Twitter. And then it got to the point where even on Facebook, like Meta had to release statements regarding whether they shadow ban, what is a shadow ban, whatever. And a shadow ban is this idea that you don't receive any indication from the platform that you've been restricted, but you've been restricted. So the example I've given in other interviews is that it's like playing video games at your older cousin's house, and your older cousin wants, you want to play split screen. He gives you a controller, you log into the game, you play the whole game, and then at the end, he just holds up the wire. And it turns out that you thought you were playing the game, but your controller wasn't even plugged in. That's really the basis of shadow banning, which is that you can still feel like you're playing the game, but even though you might see your comment posted, or you might see your actual tweet, it's not actually there. It hasn't persisted to the system. That's the extreme of shadow banning. There is more of a spectrum where we look at it from the perspective of, okay, you're just restricted in a way that it can be seen by other people, but the initial audience is tiny. So maybe it's only shown to 10 people, but you have 1,000 subscribers. And that happens to people on YouTube as well, right? You say, okay, how many subs do you have? Make sure you hit that bell icon. And that's happened to friends of mine where I'm like, hey, I don't even see your videos anymore. And they're like, yeah, man, you got to hit the bell because even if you're a subscriber, like I don't just pop up because even that is algorithmically curated. So it's really this curation combined with this like sneaky enforcement as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I like that or one thing that you said that I agree with is I don't know if you said the word absurd or insane or whatever, but to I feel like there is again generally boomers are the ones that think Facebook should fact check things.
Right.
And I'm like, how
Right.
like who what is true? Like there when you get into like I'm religious and I have perspective on how like what I believe, right? And I do believe that there is ultimate truth, But the idea that a random entity or corporation is going to be able to uh, filter and screen, like obviously it's like you can do, is there a building being built down the street? That's like, just go look, yes or no. You can fact check
Right.
that, right?
Right.
But if it's like um, the more complex stuff that is like, is our tariffs good or not, for the
Yeah.
country? It's
Right.
like, I don't know. Those that will have to, time will tell, right? And then what does good mean? Does it mean good for people, good for investors, good for, you know, whatever, like business owners? Like there's just so many angles that you can view a topic to say is it true or not, that it just, yeah, it's like, why, how, the only thing that, like, I feel genuinely like Facebook does a decent job, most social media platforms do a decent job based or from the perspective of what they're incentivized to do, right? Which is they are trying to keep people on the platform. And the ironic thing is that we all say we would, like, I don't know if you've heard the idea of um, paying a social media platform to create or give you content that would make you a better person. Have you ever heard
Sure.
of this idea?
Yeah.
I'm just like, I want to sign up. I don't want to pay a subscription to Facebook. So rather than them getting revenue from my eyeballs and giving that, or from random advertisers, if I told you that I wanted to be a more positive person, or I want to do some race, or I want to build a business, so feed me content that's going to help me achieve this arbitrary goal. Like, if the unfortunate thing, I think, is that if I paid Facebook to do that and they started doing that, I would probably end up stopping to look at Facebook at some point, because the unfortunate reality is that we all are addicted to things that probably aren't moving us towards our goals,
Right.
or we want distraction. And Facebook is just, the algorithm is designed to give us distraction, which consequently is the thing that gets us to stay on the screen longer.
Yeah. Well said. And it's unfortunate because it could be a more of a force for good. I think you and I, like having more or less grown up with the internet, we've had to like navigate our way through a fair number of like actual hoax websites that were like posted on social media in the early days, and nobody was protecting us. Nobody. There was no demands like how many times growing up do you remember? Oh, Lil Wayne has died. Like I remember probably three different occasions where that was like the number one news item, and that was kind of building up this early social savvy where you're like, hey, no, like this. That's not how it works. Like, what's the other source? Because the point is, even if somebody has posted something or has gone through the trouble of creating a website that posts a ridiculously lopsided take on the news, the point is that until that makes its way to Wikipedia or to like some record, it needs to be validated by other sources. So I don't see that as that big of a threat. And as long as we have things like Wikipedia, I think that's like a decent way of doing it. To the other point of like what does transparency really mean? I briefly touched on this in the book where you could look at certain documentaries on YouTube, for example. And I think one really popular documentary channel is like DW documentaries or whatever. And they're, it's about nature or like really interesting things in the world. But there's this huge disclaimer that it's funded by the German government. And we would look at it today and say, I don't care at all if it's funded by the German government. But you can see how as things get more and more, deeper, there are probably certain governments that we might want to be aware are funding certain sources of news. I just don't know how, like, I just don't understand the role of the platforms themselves without it becoming almost like a partisan issue or like a geopolitical issue to begin with.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, it's a good example. As I'm looking at the time here, I'm curious, moving to some wrap up questions. Uh, 3 book recommendations.
Sure. I think in Framed, I talk about a lot of the books that came before me and kind of the books that inspired my effort. Some of them inspired my effort because I thought I could do better than them, but others inspired me because I thought that there was a new way to put it, or that there was something I could contribute to drive things forward. One huge one for me was the book Spam Kings. This was published many years ago, and it deals with the origins of email spam, like the really gritty details. The author sat down with some of the most notorious spammers of the age and talked about everything, how it was profitable, trying to stop them, and all this stuff. And Brian McWilliams, the author, he wrote a blog called the Spam Kings blog, and almost the last post he ever made dealt with MySpace and started to deal with spam starting to get traction on MySpace. And that was basically where I feel my story started, because I was someone who facilitated spam on the internet. And I learned it based on things that I had found on MySpace. So the book Spam Kings is absolutely incredible. I also feel like some of the more modern books, like Super Bloom by Nick Carr, he also wrote The Shallows, which is one of the all-time classic "What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains" type books. Super Bloom, it was an honor to kind of compete for it in some sales categories, and I think that's an interesting one as well.
Super Bloom by Nicholas Carr, you said?
Yeah.
And then what was the third book?
So a third book, that's a good question. I think Careless People has been a really well received brand new title. So this was written about it was basically a firsthand experience inside Meta. It was published just a few weeks after my book. I think that this author was really brave for like what she wrote and like what the manner in which she approached it. And I think these two books, specifically Super Bloom and Careless People, bookend my experience, because I was someone on the outside. I was an outsider who was breaking the rules, and they kind of talk about rule breaking and then doing unethical things on the inside. So I think all three together are really interesting.
Is that Sarah Wynne Williams?
Yeah, it is.
Interesting. I've heard, so you have read a ton of books and reviewed them on Goodreads, right?
Yeah, that's true. I've read and reviewed probably about 250 books, and for a while it was about 50 books a year.
Wow, that's awesome. Because I hear mostly nonfiction.
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah, same with me. My wife is like all fiction, and I'm just like, I feel. I've heard people say that I should try fiction, but I have not yet.
Yeah.
Um, favorite movie or show suggestion?
I would also suggest something tied to the book. The Social Dilemma, which I believe is released on Netflix, is something that relates in some ways to my book. I have one chapter I have one chapter called Screen Grabbing, and that really talks about the misuse and addictive nature of technology, specifically of like preteens and teenagers. I think the way that that book explains it or illustrates it is beyond what I could ever do just in words. And for that, I feel lucky to have kind of been able to build upon it and also respond to some of the specific things there, like the things that I feel were accurate, inaccurate, or just better by somebody who maybe was actually in there designing a few persuasive technology systems myself.
Mm. And what's your preferred method of contact if someone wants to reach out?
These days, I'm focusing on my Beehive newsletter. So that's timohern.beehive.com. I also have a more long form blog at tjohern.com. And on social media, I'm banned from most platforms, but you can find me on LinkedIn at tohern.
How did you? So you're actually like Instagram, you're banned. Facebook, obviously.
I have significant restrictions on those platforms, but I still have private accounts. I do not have public profiles. Yeah.
Interesting. Fascinating. Well, Tim, I feel like I have more to talk about that I'm curious about. So, I always like talking to people that have gone deep on a subject like this. So, thank you again for your time, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening. My name is Chris Kiefer, and my mission is to champion the relentless pursuit of purpose. And what that means to me is to be an example, a champion, someone that is in the trenches, working and showing and winning and trying and failing in how to pursue a deeper and more meaningful life with the people that I love, with my kids, with my friends, with our family, and also just be a champion and example of entrepreneurship and following my passion and doing what I believe I'm called to on this earth. And so if that inspires you in some way, please share this episode. If you want, like, subscribe, share, whatever, do all the stuff. It means the world to me to get this message and get these guests that I have out there. And if you're interested in any of the book recommendations or looking up other episodes, the movie list, you can visit my website, chriskiefer.com, for all the details on the show. And also check out the Boolean review software, as well as the Boolean automation consulting company that I own for home service businesses. So thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode.